Let's bring in Mike Farrell, Rivals.com recruiting analyst. Signing day was yesterday in the country. And, Mike, biggest winner of the day was who?
I think of the day, I think Auburn. You know, they got the number one player in the country. They added a bunch of top players from Florida. Will Muschamp going over from Florida to Auburn. It made a big deal. A lot of kids in the state of Florida were loyal to him and decided to take a look at Auburn. UCLA did well, and USC finished number one ahead of Alabama, which is, you know, the first time in 4 years somebody's beaten Alabama for the title. So I think those three schools stood out.
Not a great day for Jim Harbaugh in Michigan, but was that to be expected given the limited amount of time that he had to actually recruit?
Yeah, he only had like 2.5 weeks. You know, that's not enough time. Most of these kids have been recruited for 3 years by the same school. So he came in, he flipped Zach Gentry, who was a quarterback from New Mexico who was committed to Texas, big kid, 6'6", 230. The type of kid that I think Harbaugh really likes to have in his system, a big mobile quarterback who can throw the ball. So that helps quite a bit. But he tried to flip a few kids, battled Urban Meyer for Mike Weber, an in-state running back. Didn't work out, but I think the battles between Harbaugh and Meyer moving forward are going to be pretty epic.
Yeah, I mean, is Jim Harbaugh going to be a high-level recruiter? I mean, he was great at Stanford. When he goes to Michigan, is he going to have the same type of impact?
Yeah, he's a big name. You know, he's been in the NFL. He's had success at the college level. You know, kids want two things. They want to win. So he's got to turn the program around, and that starts with recruiting. And they want a guy who knows how to get them to the NFL. And Harbaugh can say, you know, I've done it all. I've played in the NFL. You know, I've been a big-time college guy. I've won in college. I've won in the NFL. So he's definitely going to recruit at a high level.
Now, clarify this for me, Mike. And we're talking to Mike Farrell, Rivals.com recruiting analyst. Is this kind of a soft deadline for declaring? Because I keep reading about guys that are still undeclared that are out there as possibles.
Yeah, it's a ceremonial day. I mean, 99% of the kids sign on signing day, but it's not required. You know, you can sign up until the middle of April. You know, there are kids out there still a bit confused. We have one kid in Georgia, Roquan Smith, a linebacker, committed on TV to UCLA and then had second thoughts. In fact, one of the Georgia commitments that's friendly with him was in attendance and I guess got in his ear afterwards. And he's still reconsidering staying home and going to Georgia or traveling across the country. So, you know, some of the biggest names out there, Terrell Pryor, Jadeveon Clowney, Bryce Brown, some of the biggest names over the last many years went well beyond signing day.
Is there any player out there that you can see having an impact next season?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a ton. I mean, more freshmen play than ever before. You know, so Josh Rosen is a quarterback, early enrollee at UCLA. He's going to be competing for the starting job. He's the number 2 player in the country, one of the best quarterbacks that I've scouted over the years. But you're going to see a ton of these guys. You won't hear about the defensive players as much. You know, a Derwin James at Florida State, who's a safety who I think is going to compete right away. But you'll hear about the offensive players. Calvin Ridley going to Alabama, I think he'll get a shot right away. Terry Godwin, a wide receiver going to Georgia. Tyron Johnson, a wide receiver going to LSU. You know, running back Darius Geis will probably spell Leonard Fournette a little bit at LSU also. So those are the kind of guys you'll hear about. But there's going to be a ton of defensive players that make an impact.
Hanging out with Mike Farrell of Rivals.com. I'm what you can call a National Signing Day novice, and I understand that, you know, Chris Mannix here made the point that some of these guys don't sign until April. We're not going to see some of these guys for a long time, or they're not going to make an impact immediately. So be National Signing Day hype man for me. Why should I put it on my calendar next year?
Well, I mean, when you look at the rankings of the number one team, you know, in the recruiting rankings, every team has won a national championship at least 2 or 3 years later. Texas in 2002, won a few years later with Vince Young. LSU in 2003, won a few years later. USC went on their run in the mid-2000s. Florida under Urban Meyer and now Nick Saban. The only one that didn't was USC in 2010, but they got hammered with sanctions, and their depth just didn't allow them to do it. So when you look at recruiting rankings, yeah, there are some outliers. You know, Oregon doesn't finish in the top 10 every year. And they do pretty well, obviously. You know, and some programs like Michigan State or West Virginia over the years, Boise State, have done well without high-level recruits. But for the most part, when you look at these recruiting rankings, they definitely tell a story. Florida's 23 with a new coach. Michigan's 52. You know, 1 year of recruiting transition could set you back 2 or 3 years. So we're gonna pay attention to those two programs and see how long it takes for them to get the ship righted.
Mike, let's say I grant you one wish, one change to the recruiting process. What would it be?
Early signing period. I want it in August. I'd like to see before the football season these kids have an opportunity to sign. Everybody says, well, they can't sign. I mean, there's so many coaching changes, blah, blah, blah. You could put a stipulation in there if they sign in August and the head coach leaves that they can open up and it's not binding anymore. But I just like to give a lot of the kids the opportunity to sign so that you don't have the temptation to flip or decommit or take these late visits and all this stuff. And I think a lot of the hoopla, that is in signing day, when you have, 2,000 plus kids signing all in one day, you're going to hear about the dumb stories, the kids flipping a coin to decide or, pulling out live animals as props. You're going to hear about the less than 1% of the knuckleheads out there. But 99% of these kids do it professionally. They do it well, but it's just too much for one day.
Mike, let's get to the crux of the issue here, the fax machines, sir. Why do they still use fax machines? What is the deal? What, in stone blazing rule is there? Why can't we change it up and join 2015?
They could. I mean, it's a traditional thing. Eventually it will be changed. I mean, obviously you can do emails and PDFs and, you can, with smartphones, I mean, you could do anything you wanted. You could get your letter of intent through your smartphone. You could sign it through your smartphone.
Carrier pigeon.
Yeah. Well,
Smoke signals.
it is one of those antiquated things. I think there's a lot of things in football that are traditional that just don't work anymore. But the fax machine is going to be one of those things. I mean, there's fax cams and, you've got live streaming, views of the fax cams. I remember a few years ago, there was a very attractive girl at Alabama who was getting the faxes on the fax cam, and she became very popular because, people were watching that fax machine all day long. I mean, it's the day of the fax machine. Why would you want to take it away from the poor fax machine?
I was about to ask, is there an expert that knows how to use it? Because I want to know the percentage, or there's got to be stories about malfunctions or errors or paper jams or just things getting mixed up, different phone numbers dialed. How often does that happen on these fax machines?
Well, a lot of them are e-faxes now, and I've actually, over the last few years, I've been contacted by fax machine companies and e-fax to do interviews about the fax machine to try to get more promotion for it because, it is it's kind of like the VCR, I mean, why use a VCR when you don't have to anymore? But yeah, there are certainly stories of jams, panicky paper jams and letters coming in wrong side, where you just get a blank piece of paper and people freak out.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think that could happen with anything. I mean, I do know this. We send out our camp invitations on PDF, and a lot of people still don't know how to use them. So you got to understand that there are people who are very educated in technology, and then there are people who, still at this day and age don't have a computer. So you have to really have, I think, I guess, the lowest common denominator in communication is the fax machine. Everybody can find one and use one. So I guess that's maybe why they use it.
Mike, before we let you go, give me the name or unname out there that everyone's going to be fighting over before that hard deadline in April.
Well, Roquan's the only guy left. He's the linebacker from Georgia, and he's the only guy left. So they're battling right now. UCLA's battling him come across the country, and Georgia's saying stay home, and he's got everybody in his ear. But, this year, less kids decided not to sign, which I think is great. I don't have a Cyrus Quandro for you or a Jadeveon Clowney for you or a Terrell Pryor for you this year. I've got Roquan Smith, 4-star linebacker, very good player. But I'm glad I'm not telling you that, we've got this big-time guy who decided, hey, you know what, I'm just going to wait. Because most of them did it for attention.
Good to visit with you, Mike. No, it's a busy day. Appreciate the time.
All right, thanks very much.
That's Mike Farrell, Rivals.com.